Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Hadith Disciple Critical Book Review. And the work that we have for the disciples and disciples today is, as you can see, it says here, Al-La'alil Masnu'ah, Fake Pearls, a collection of fabricated prophetic sayings by Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. The book is called Fake Pearls, and the author is Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. Our general view and opinion of the book is that it is very beneficial. It's a good read. It is a worthy contribution to the Hadith Renaissance, to Hadith culture, and to the Islamic library in general. It's definitely a book that if you get an opportunity to buy and purchase, you should. Let's get started bid'Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a selection from the introduction, the basic information about the book, simple background, and let's read some of the table of contents, whereas it's a very detailed and exhaustive table of contents. The book here says this is the second edition in March 2002. It was distributed in Saudi Arabia by Dar al-Hadiyan Publishers and Distributors. As far as its distribution in the United States, then it's the Islamic Education and Media, 730 East 10th Street of Brooklyn, New York City. And it was published by Al-Atiq Publishers Incorporated in Canada. It says 65 Trevorton Drive, Scarborough, in Canada, and mentions the website, the phone number, etc. So the second edition, 2002. We have the preface to the second edition. It says here, this book has been long in the making. Although the main part was done several years ago and friends were pressing for its publication, the expansion of the work for the addition of a few more hadith saw a couple of years to slip by. Another hurdle was the Arabic text. I decided to include them because although increasingly Arabs are now reading books in English, but when it comes to Quran and Hadith, they would like to see the original text. I couldn't find time to type the text myself, and my children were engaged in typing for my other works. Finally, the gap in time and schedules arrived, and the Arabic part began to see progress at a good pace. My second son, Adam, although still in middle school, once again proved his mettle. He kept working on and off until finally he was through. My second daughter did the proofreading, but progress was again interrupted. I cannot find time for reading, but progress, he says, I cannot find time for its page setting. That problem was solved by Brother Fayyaz Sheikh, who, despite his busy work schedule as a pharmacist, volunteered his services. Unfortunately, however, I cannot make use of the work he did. In any case, as the book goes to the press, I feel enormous gratitude to all those who put in their efforts. The most I can do is to say, may Allah accept them for his services. Then mentions the numbering system. And he says here, this is Sayyid Iqbal Zahir, January 22nd, 2002. On the back of the book, the excerpt says here, a remarkable thing about Islam is the authenticity of its sources. The Quran and the prophetic sayings. The Quran takes care of itself. Its inimitability guarantees that it will remain unaltered to the end of the world. But the prophetic sayings are less inwardly guarded. The early scholars of Islam therefore quickly set about documenting the trustworthy reports. But that was no guarantee against fresh incursions of the untrustworthy ones, preachers, zealous, ascetics, pamphleteers, storytellers, and ignorant Samaritans of every age give currency to old spurious narratives and add a few of their own invention. In their early phase, these remain in verbal circulation. When they begin to infiltrate into written works, the scholars spring into action to purge them out. The cycle goes on. This present work, selected from 5 different sources, is a short collection of such reports as falsely attributed to the Prophet of Islam. The author, Sayyid Iqbal Zahir, is perhaps no stranger to the reading public. Author of dozens of books and translations, his most important contribution so far is his detailed but authentic commentary on the Quran, Ishraq al-Ma'ani, rightly subtitled, to the end of the excerpt with regards to that book on tafsir. Khair, inshallah. So that's the introduction or the preface. That's the excerpt. Then we have the table of contents, which is very exhaustive, very extensive. We don't have the time to read all of it. He starts off by saying part 1, Ibn Jawzi, and then he mentions the hadiths. The hadiths, the main sentence from the hadiths is the actual heading in the table of contents. When I was taken to my Lord, whoever named a son as Muhammad, no Muslim went near his wife. A jinni used to come. People of Iraq, Dajjal will appear. It says here, where were you when Adam? Allah spoke directly to Musa. I am marrying off my daughter. It will be said from below the arsh. We were sitting around the Prophet. He had Ibrahim on his right thigh. Why is it that you kissed Fatima? When the Prophet married a woman, don't teach your woman how to read. He prohibited that bread. And obviously, after each sentence is ... towards the end of the hadith. Whoever taunted his brother, the sins of Adam are not written down. Whoever devoted himself to Allah, Allah has a pillar of light. Teach your children the first thing. Allah will drink from my pond. Allah will raise the people on the day of ... Then he mentions part 2. He says Saghani. In other words, another offer, another source of fabricated hadiths. The Prophet used Persian. The hadith Ratan al-Hindi. Faith is naked and barren. The modest is a loser. Whoever spoke about a worldly thing, red rose is from a believer's heart is Allah's arsh. Hold on to the religion of old. Poverty is my pride. He whose prayers are plenty. Don't travel when the moon is in. You may consume lentil. Part 3. Tahir Patani. I was an unknown treasure. Evolution over evolution. Fast and get healthy. Hajj is jihad. When you are finished, the bringing back. Whoever had 3. Whoever smelled. The seal of the Prophet Sulaiman's. Seek to repent a lot in Rajab. I have 2 qualities. Then he mentions part 4. Mullah Ali Qari. Abu Hanifa is. 4 will never be satiated. Most of the inhabitants. Clay eating is prohibited. Bilal used to pronounce. Shaitan runs through. Allah suspends punishment. Sometimes a man's fame. Allah created intellect. Allah has placed the taste. Allah has promised. There are sins that, etc. Part 5. Nasruddin Albani. Religion is the name of. He whose prayers do not prevent him from. Avoid the dust. His Allah's knowledge. When Adam committed his sin, the world is forbidden. Let him who said the adhan, he who visited the house to the end of the extensive, exhaustive contents with regards to the selection of Albani. Then the author mentions a bibliography, and then the author mentions an index. Let's take a brief, the introduction is pretty long, so we really don't have the time to go into it, but so much. The first sentence says, or the first paragraph says, Hadith definition. The Quran and Sunnah are 2 primary sources of the religion of Islam. Sunnah narrations are known as Hadith. Hadith stands for that which is, or for what is transmitted by a chain of narrators as the Prophet's words, deeds, and what bore his tacit approval, or the description of his person. In other words, Hadith consists of 2 elements: the chain of transmission, isnad, and the text, matan. Non-experts have only one element in mind, the text, but the experts have the 2, the chain of transmitters plus the text, towards the end of a very detailed and long and very interesting, and in some places peculiar introduction. Let's get started with the pros, then the cons, then the notable quotes, then the specific sins of the book. As far as the pros of the book, first and foremost, the book deals with a specific subgenre of hadith science. We have books on hadith, many of which we've studied and critiqued and reviewed in general. They deal with all of the different comprehensive topics of ilm al-hadith, ilm al-rijal, mustalah, hadith science, hadith compilation. But this one deals with a specific subgenre, and that is hadith fabrication. Fabricators and fabricated hadiths. Number 2, the second pro of the book is that it deals with a major historical issue, a major historical problem and challenge, both inside and outside of Islam. The concept of lying, the concept of liars, the concept of accidental or incidental or coincidental inaccuracies and making things up, forgeries, is something that is a major issue in the history of man, of all religions, wars, battles, different horrible things that are said to have done or people done and did. Things happen. These people were killed. This means people were killed. This war was started because of this, so on and so forth. It's a major historical problem, the concept of forgeries, intentional or unintentional, inaccurate reports of history. Number 3, the book is full of examples and specimens. We read to you only a few of the pieces, or a few pieces from the content, the table of contents, and it's very detailed. So the book is full of examples. There's all types of examples of different hadiths, different reports that are considered to be fabricated. Number 4, the work gives a very detailed introduction. Not everything in the introduction we agree with. Not everything in the introduction is correct and valid and accurate, but it's detailed, and that's a benefit. Number 5, the work merges between classic and modern. Ibn al-Jawzi of the 6th century, Nasruddin al-Albani of the modern day today. All right, so it merges between those two worlds. Number 6, the book covers various topics. The hadiths, as you just saw, we read a few of them, talks about everything from eating lentils, beans, soup, vegetables, grocers, eggplant, things like this, to sexual intercourse, to naming your child after the Prophet, so on and so forth. So that's a benefit for the reader, is the diversity and the richness of the content. Number 7, I would say, is the detailed bibliography. The detailed bibliography, and also, well, the bibliography isn't but so detailed, but it is there. Some books don't even have that. Also, we have a detailed index with the names, with the different titles and concepts, along with the extensive table of contents. So those are the main contents of the prose, the main prose of the book. I'm sure there are others. Let's get into the cons of the book. Number 1, lack of citation and reference in the introduction. He doesn't quote where he's getting his information from. He doesn't have any citations, any references in the introduction. Number 2, many typos. Number 3, most cases or many cases it's a word-for-word translation, very robotic and very mechanical translation. Number 4 is an abundance of scientific errors, not typos, not grammar, no, actual akhta ilmiya, in which the author is clearly mistaken, misinformed, and confused. Number 5, profound disrespect for hadith scholars and their great heritage and legacy in his introduction, which we'll read a few examples, in which he just basically spat upon the scholars of hadith, whether he knew it or not. Number 6 is severe confusion in many places. Number 7 is lack of scholarly veracity in his comments. Some comments were a bit cheesy, a bit cheap, not scientific at all. Khairan, inshallah. Now, let's take a few notable quotes from the book with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things that are worthy of reading and hearing about. We'll start off with the intro, inshallah. First one is on the actual first page. It says here, in any case, if authentic, hadith has a legal and moral value. It greatly helps understand the Quran. In fact, many Quranic verses cannot be fully comprehended without the hadith. From the earliest times, therefore, Muslim scholars have paid extraordinary attention to the collection and preservation of hadith. Many of them devoted their lives to its study, authentication, classification, explanation, and popularization. Such of them came to be known as muhaddithun, singular of muhaddith, or doctors of hadith. Their number, if we count only the experts, run into thousands. Another example of a notable quote, let's take a hadith, actual fabricated hadith, which is notable. It says here on page 37, من لعب الشطرنج فهو ملعون. Cursed is the man who played chess. Cursed is the man who played chess. Interesting hadith, which is very widespread. Another example of a notable quote, maybe we'll take another hadith, or from the introduction, page 13. It says, I have not observed more falsehood in anyone than those who have a reputation for goodness. This class of people, in fact, lasts to this day. They are stubborn carriers of forged and weak hadith. He's quoting from a scholar, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, from the teachers of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and from the students of Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj, one of the grand hadith champions of Iraq, of Baghdad, one of the founding fathers of hadith science and of criticizing and attacking the weak and poor narrators. He says, I've never seen a people who have a greater reputation, a stronger reputation for falsehood, a greater legacy in kadhib and batil than those who have a reputation for good. In other words, righteous people who are inaccurate reporters, who fast, who pray, who make tawaf, who give sadaqah, who visit the orphans and the widows, but then they have the nerve and the audacity to pick up the feather and to pick up the quill and to talk about hadith. And this is something that is relative in 2017. People that have good, inshallah, good intentions. They're good Muslims, hopefully, but they think that Islam and knowledge can just be, picked up and put down whenever you want to. And you don't have to devote any time and sacrifice to veracity in one's studies. Khairan, inshallah. Another notable quote, perhaps, is on page 60 Another hadith here that's considered fabricated. It says here, nakihul yadi mal'un. It says, he who masturbates is accursed. He who masturbates is accursed. Okay. Another hadith, there are many. Page 41, maybe this is the last quote we'll mention. It says, Abu Hanifa siraj ummati. It says, Abu Hanifa is the lamp of my ummah. Abu Hanifa is the lamp of my ummah. Khairan, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now let's go to the specific sins of the book. A few examples, because we said there are many, in which we have not general problems, but specific scientific errors and mistakes of the author. Just in the introduction alone, there are several, unfortunately. On page 2, the author says, originally, transmission of prophetic words was verbal. It was only preservation that was in written form. That is, although many of the first generation Muslims had preserved it in writing, what each of them had heard from the Prophet, the transmission to the next generation and to the others remained verbal. There was no special reason for a teacher or transmitter to offer the students or others copies of what they had preserved. Firstly, writing material was scarce. Secondly, the earliest Muslims were men of honesty and integrity. They were very scrupulous about what they heard from the Prophet and what they had narrated on his behalf. They had paid a heavy price for faith, having fought under his banner, received injuries, lost dear ones, and suffered great material losses. They could only be the ones, therefore, to treat the Prophet's words curiously or pass them on unscrupulously. To them, religion, as embodied in the Quran and Hadith, was just about everything that mattered in their lives. All else was secondary. In general, that's correct, and that's good. That's very good speech. But to say that they had no need to write it down, it wasn't written down only for the purpose of preservation, so on and so forth, that's incorrect, that's inaccurate. There are many examples in which the companions wrote down things not for liars or lack of integrity, but actual rulings, different injunctions, different ahkam, specific things that they heard from the Prophet that was not in the Quran, and they wanted to have it on paper for one reason or another. So that is scientifically incorrect. Then we have on page 5, he says here, a Sahih Hadith, page 4, here's to page 5, is one that is reported by trustworthy narrators, thiqah, men of integrity, adl, and the chain of the narrators ending right with the Prophet ﷺ without a break, muttasil. The report being not an isolated one, shadh, and not carrying hidden defect, illa. The definition sounds simple, but each of these conditions is explained in such detail by the hadith doctors that it becomes difficult even for a trustworthy hadith to get through. He says, listen to this speech now, that it sounds simple, these 5 conditions, but these 5 conditions have so much depth and they are explained separately that it's difficult even for a Sahih hadith to get through. So let's ask the question, how do you know that a hadith is Sahih if it didn't yet get through those 5 conditions? It's not Sahih yet. Obviously, if it didn't make it to the end of the assembly line, it's not fully assembled. So how can you say the assembly line in this factory is so deep, it's so sophisticated that hardly any assembled product can get through? The product is not assembled until it reaches the what? End of the assembly line. Let alone the derogatory meaning of this sentence. Basically that the hadith is so strict that there are barely any hadiths that are authentic. Hadith can barely make it through because there's so much depth to these 5 conditions. The author, he then says, for example, a trustworthy thiqah narrator is qualified as one whose name, nickname, title, parentage, occupation, dates of birth and death, places where he lived, his teachers, students, details about journeys or undertaken, and many other information should be available without any contradiction surrounding them. If they are not available, the narrator has the risk of being branded majhul, being unknown, and his narratives rejected. That's not absolutely correct. There are details with regards to the majhul narrator. In general, elementary, rudimentary, that's correct. Type. Then the next example of a specific sin, as we said, there are many on page 8. He says, understandably, and as pointed out above, the first efforts of the hadith doctors were aimed at collecting the Sahih traditions, rather than bother themselves about forged or questionable ones. Compilers such as Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, Bukhari, and many others paid no attention to the weak or forged traditions. La ilaha illallah. Have you not read the books of Imam al-Bukhari that he wrote just on liars, on fake narrators? In Imam al-Bukhari's book, At-Tarikh al-Saghir, Bukhari wrote books just on criticizing narrators, disparaging reporters. Imam Ahmad, he says that Imam Ahmad did pay no attention to da'if hadiths. He just paid attention to sahih hadiths. Imam Ahmad is one of the founding fathers of Jarh wa Ta'dil. And they would sit there and ask him for hours about narrators, about liars, about kadhab, mubtadi'ah. So how can a person say something like this? There lies no doubt is a reason why he made that mistake. Page 9, he talks about the Shia. The Shia, originally those from the political supporters of Ali, who are a little more zealous about Ali than Ali himself. Is that correct? Is it just politics? Or is this from the sediments of the Orientalists and their doubts that the Shia is just political difference with the rest of the Muslims, as they try to make it seem it's just sectarian difference? The Shia didn't have Aqidah issues and problems with their creed and their faith. Moving forward, he says here, were the first to invent hadith in favor of Ali and his family. Shuraik bin Abdullah, the chief judge, himself a Shi'i, but a moderate one, said, I pass on everyone's report except for those of the Shia. Tight. Moving forward, page 10, he has more specific things. He says, some of the fanatical Ahl Sunnah, and then he puts in parentheses, the great majority were not to be left behind in reciprocation. They too invented a hadith in favor of those who they supported. For instance, one forged narration says, there isn't a leaf in paradise, but the names of Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman are inscribed on it along with the testimony, there's no deity save Allah. This was in the answer to the Shia who cursed the three. So, who fabricated this hadith? Who do you mean Ahl Sunnah? Muslims who weren't Shia? Or Ahl Sunnah, scholars, the ulama, the righteous people of hadith? What do you mean by that? And what's fanatical of Ahl Sunnah? The people who said that the best of those who were after the Prophet were Abu Bakr and Umar. Well, how is that fanatical, and how did they become the great majority? He then mentions in the next paragraph, the early heretics were individuals rather than organized groups known as Zanadiqa, singing a Zindiq, atheist heretic, who could not fight Islam openly, so they took shelter under the cloak of piety. They could not introduce anything into the Quran, literally a locked book. So they fabricated hadith and spread them among the masses. So therefore, the Quran is totally pure, kept safe. There's no distortion. Nothing can be added or taken from the Quran. But the hadith is just like an open, pool. You can toss anything you want into it, basically. There's no preservation of the hadith of the Sunnah. How many misinterpretations, false interpretations were made about the Quran and discrepancies about those meanings in the Quran. So even if you don't change the words, what good are the words without the proper interpretation and application? So people who talk about hadith being forged and fabricated and made up, the Quran is 100% clear, lucid, plain. You have no worries. The hadith are all worries. That's not true. That is not true at all. Moving forward, page 11, he says, the Muslims have been throughout their history slow and half-hearted in the pursuit of religious heretics. The problem, therefore, persisted. There was never a time in which the heretics were persecuted, were rounded up. Many of them were crucified. They were hanged. They were executed. And the list goes on if you read anything in the books of Islamic history. Then on page 13, or not on page 13, there are many other points. Khairan, inshallah. He talks on page 19, page 21, page 23. Okay, the introduction, page 29, all right, is full of akhta ilmiya. As far as the actual book itself, then there aren't too many specific sins in the actual translation of the hadith and the order of the hadith, walhamdulillah. So therefore, the book Fake Pearls, Iqbal, Sayyid Zahir, the grade that we give to this book, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, and looking at its overall benefit and its overall good, by the permission of Allah, is 3.5 quills out of 5. 3.5 quills out of 5 for the book Fake Pearls. Thank you very much for your time. Until the next episode.